Chapter 6, Subchapter 2, Shanghai, the Pearl of Asia. It was 1997, and I arrived in my ancestral home. It feels strange to call it that, as my mother was not from China. Yet by this point, I considered myself more Chinese than anything else. I was raised by the Chinese at the compound, surrounded by their culture and value. Growing up, Chinese was my daily language, while English and French were the languages of my education. And of course, nothing pleases me more than a hot bowl of noodles. What a strange and wonderful life it has been. My French father, whom I knew precious little about, was born here, and it felt only fitting to return. I arrived in a city that was, in many ways, a chaotic sewer. Dirty, grimy, and filthy. Shanghai had an edge that was both exciting and overwhelming. When it rained, the streets flooded with filthy water, sometimes rising halfway up your calves. The roads were riddled with potholes, and disrepair was the norm. If taxis weren't available, the solution was to hop onto the back of a motorbike. It was wild, truly the wild east. But amidst the chaos, I saw the potential. Highways and bridges were under construction, and skyscrapers were rising like bamboo shoots after a spring rain. Shanghai was on the cusp of becoming the #1 city in Asia, and I had arrived ready to sink my teeth into the juiciness of the action. I loved the energy and the possibilities. To my horror, however, I quickly discovered that Mandarin was not the language of choice here. In Shanghai, the locals spoke Shanghainese, a distinct dialect with no books or guides available for learning it. I realized immersion was my only option if I wanted to understand and connect with my new environment. Fortunately, a solution to this challenge soon presented itself. Footnote 27. Of course I had heard of Shanghainese on the compound, but we were never told that it was so very different from Mandarin in its pronunciation. The Lees do not come from the Yangtze River Delta, the area around Shanghai. They are from the north of China, and on the compound we only spoke a Beijing form of Mandarin. When they moved to France, any cultural knowledge they had acquired of living in Shanghai was lost. They cut all ties to the past. They made every attempt to hide from their past. We return. I arrived in the city on October 1st, National Day, during a week-long public holiday. My company placed me in a foreigner-approved hotel near the historic Bund area. Once the beating heart of commerce in Asia, the Bund was now a collection of majestic but broken-down colonial-era buildings overlooking the Huangpu River. As I wandered through the city, I quickly became aware of the attention I was drawing. People stared at me constantly, many likely having never seen a foreigner before. Children were always pointing at me. No, not in a bad way. Something akin to seeing the bearded lady at the freak show part of a circus. One day an elderly man approached me and, to my surprise, greeted me in fluent English. "It is good to see that foreigners are returning to China after 50 years of absence," he said. I replied in Chinese, "Grandfather, how is it that you speak such excellent English?" Calling an older man grandfather was simply the cultural form of respect. His response came in English once more. "My father served one of the assistants to the Consul General of Great Britain before liberation in 1949. I was raised in their home during the 1930s and was given the gift of the King's English. Yes, what the West calls the Chinese Revolution, the Chinese call the period of liberation. This gentleman became my friend and remained so until his passing several years later." As for the foreigner-approved hotel, it was more than just a place to stay, it was also a place of quiet surveillance. The government was as curious about my activities as I was about my new home. Each floor had watchful eyes keeping track of my comings and goings. I was explicitly told that I could not entertain guests in my room, which was a polite way of saying no female visitors. This was a special and peculiar time in China's history, a period of cautious reopening marked by an ever-present sense of supervision. The next day I met the elderly gentleman again and told him, "I will soon move away from the Bund, and I would like to find an ayi, a maid, to live with me, cook, clean, and teach me Shanghainese. Do you have any suggestions on how to find such a person?" He replied, "Go to Fuxing Park on a Sunday. You will find many beggars there. They beg for many reasons. Do a mitzvah and find an appropriate person." Curious, I asked, "What does mitzvah mean?" He smiled and explained, "My father's employers were Jewish, and they taught me that a mitzvah is more than a good deed, it's a noble act." His explanation immediately reminded me of something Baba had told me years earlier. It is easy to help another when it requires little effort, but you have performed a noble deed when you make a true sacrifice. Footnote 28. So strange that years later Eve would teach the same lesson about offering a favor before it is asked. We return. With his advice in mind, my first priority became finding an apartment where foreigners could live, along with hiring an ayi who could teach me some Shanghainese. Sunday was still a few days away, so I spent the time exploring and learning the city. It was a period of pure innocence, filled with excitement and discovery. On Sunday afternoon, I went to Fuxing Park as instructed. What I saw there shocked me deeply. Every deformity and decrepit form of the human body imaginable was on display. The sight was overwhelming and sickening. I found it hard to believe that this was where I would find someone suitable to become my maid and teacher. Just as I was reaching my limit, I noticed a young woman sitting on the ground. She had a sign in front of her that read, "My husband was killed in a factory, please help me." Beside her was a small clay bowl containing a few coins and crumpled, dirty pieces of currency. I approached her and asked, "Where are you from?" "Shanghai," she replied curtly. "Did you attend school? Can you read and write?" I asked further. Her eyes lit up with a fiery indignation and she snapped back at me. "You, Guilao, always think that all Chinese are from the countryside with no education. We Shanghainese are unique and special, and you dare to ask me if I'm educated? Maybe you should leave China and go back to the West." Footnote 29. Guilao, or foreign devil, is a very derogatory term for foreigners. We return.